Welcome, everyone, to our VWEC Metaverse Expert Series. We are glad to see you and have you join us for today's very exciting presentation and discussion. For those who are new, our website is, putting it in the chat, you can find VWEC on many social media channels through this link as well. After our presentation, we should have some time for questions and discussion. We are pleased to offer our Expert Series presentation in both voice and text. Text for anyone who may not be using voice is shared on our YouTube live stream, and I will put that link in here. You can also find this in the sign in front of our stage as well. Speaking of signs, we would like you to know how to find out about our events. Our survey plant to my left has just a quick survey that is a great help to us. If you would please fill it out if you haven't before, and feel free to send along any comments you have. We would like to thank you all for joining us today, and I'm happy to introduce our Metaverse expert speaker to you. Dr. Leticia De Leon is a full professor of teaching and learning at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Over the years, her research has focused on engagement and motivation, immersive learning, and the learning journeys new technologies can offer adult learners. She started using Second Life as part of a research project on teacher preparation and immersive learning. Since then, she has been involved with Virtual World's Best Practices in Education Conference as a behind-the-scenes builder and game creator. Her latest game creation is the Rock and Bones Mysteries, a trilogy that spans the biome parks of the current conference regions. Previously, she created the trilogy Creatures of Myth and the environment underwater game called The Queen's Heroes in the Five Kingdoms, which led to a research publication and presentation entitled It Is Real, an exploratory case study of empathy in a virtual game. Today, Letty will present Playable Journeys, how games engage the mind through stories. Storytelling in games can be entertainment, but they can also offer a meaning-making experience, especially when they are created in immersive virtual environments. While not all games can be educational, they can foster critical thinking, empathy, creativity, and deeper cognitive connections. This presentation demonstrates the impact of storytelling in virtual environments, including the motivational elements that guide learning and why it matters that we play them. So let's welcome Dr. De Leon, Letty Luckstone in Virtual Worlds. We are so glad to have you today, Letty. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ellie. I appreciate being invited to be here today. I know I haven't done presentations in the virtual environment for quite a while. I like being a behind the scene minion. That's what I tell Kevin as well. So, and it's a very fulfilling, job as well. So, playable journeys. I think we all like going on journeys. I know in real life, as in immersive experiences, I like going on journeys. And this journey actually happened when we were very, very young. If there are any educators in here who specialize in early childhood education, and you will know the importance of play for building critical thinking, for building socialization, for building all sorts of skills that children need in order to eventually develop into a well-rounded adult. And of course, what I'm focusing on today is the adult experience, because of course we all know Second Life is basically just for adults, but it isn't just about that. It's more than that, because games can be accessible to anyone at any age, and it just depends on what is engaging to people. Because stories, everybody has their own favorite type of story. Some people like science fiction, some people like fantasy, some people like realistic stories, historical stuff. So there's so many different things. And for those of you that are librarians and language arts teachers, you probably recognize some of these things. And in particular, my slide, which is the only one I'm going to talk through, which basically gives you the story elements. The ones I selected. And these I selected specifically because they are the ones that are better able to be developed into a story game in immersive environments. Because remember, here in Second Life, the very first thing we do is we create a setting. And of course, we immediately go to the marketplace, or we tap into our inventory and start looking through things to make sure that we have what we need. The setting can be the most important thing in a virtual environment because it sets the stage for the journey. And of course, if you've played any of the games that I've developed, you know that I have a special place for fantasy. And so most of the stories kind of develop into fantasy elements, fantasy mystery, fantasy sci-fi, but always fantasy is the main core of it. And so that's why my settings are also sometimes fantastical. And of course, when we started building the biomes for the conference for Virtual World's Best Practices in Education, the setting was what grabbed me immediately. And for me, when I develop a game that has a story, it's the setting that's going to trigger it. Just like the first game that I did, the underwater realm. It was all based on the setting that other people decided to build, not me. I did not decide that. And the same thing applies for the current build. Once I knew what the builds were going to be, then I started developing the story. And that's where the setting begins for me. Now, what's really, really important about setting is that it is, for learners, learning should be a multimodal experience. When you read it in a book, and of course, I'm a bookworm. I love reading. And so when I read about a setting, the imagery, I need to see it and smell it, in verse. Here, you can actually see it. It develops in front of you. And so, you immediately get a sense of whimsy for it. But the most important thing about setting in stories is that it starts activating our pattern recognition skills. And it starts our brain associating images to things. Even though you may not know yet what the game is going to be fully about or what the story is engaged, but your brain has already started analyzing all the details and trying to predict outcomes. So that's really the most important elements of setting. And if you want to set up a game setting, like I said, I always start with setting. I think it's easier for me once somebody else decides what the setting is going to be, and then I create the game around that. I don't know if some of you, do it the other way around. But for me, it's easier that way because it brings up my imagination. So when you're building, games in interactive environments, think about the following thing. Where do your characters live? Why is this setting important? What is this ideal? And of course, what are the interactive elements that the setting could make possible? One of the really interesting things about the biomes was that we could hide stuff very easily. I mean, imagine how hard it was for those of you to find items in the jungle. And I know that Kevin would tease me sometimes and say, "Wow, you're diabolical. You hide stuff where people will never find this." And I just, yes, they will. They just need to be paying attention. But really, for me, where those things are hidden for the game are important to the story. I don't put them just wherever it's easy to hide them. I put them there because it matters to the story. And I always build little kind of vignettes around places. So those are important things that you should consider when you consider a setting. If you want to build your own setting, let's say you're a little reversed other, instead of me, you start with characters. Characters start talking to you. And then you want to start asking them, well, where do you live? Where are these situations happening? What's going on? For me, characters come next rather than setting. Those are the ones. And characters are really critical elements. And you might think, well, none of the settings, none of the stories that we created for the conference had characters. Well, they had non-player characters. They had NPCs. But what was really important, what's really the most critical element in immersive environments is the character is the player. So you are the one immersed in the experience. And the most important element of that is because it gives you a connection There's something called neural coupling that occurs in the brain when the player makes connections to the characters and to the idea. And of course, it's even more appealing when you realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm the main character, I'm the hero. And so it immediately establishes that emotional connection to the story. And that makes the experience a lot more impactful and memorable. And these two settings and characters is really what makes it easy to be motivated to continue. Because if you're a character, now it's your journey. Now you want to go on it. And so you're gaining a lot of benefits from that. And of course, one of the most important ones that happens a lot in stories is empathy. And that's what I focused on in that study that I did with the first game. Because that's one of the things that this environment is ideal for. As long as you develop characters that are appealing and that connect on some level with you or with the player, you're going to build empathy. And given the kind of world we live in nowadays, we really, really, need empathy. We need to be able to walk in people's shoes. We need to be able to not just understand them, but be with them in the experience. And so the characters become a really important. So you don't necessarily need to go out there and start buying NPCs or in the marketplace or create your own. Although you certainly can. We've also done that as well. But a lot of times the most important character is you, the player, and you don't need anything else, especially if you make the appeal very, very attractive for people. You want them to want the experience. And so one of the first things that you want to do is give them a call to action, and that's where the conflict kind of sets in. um, because that's where you realize, oh, I have something to do here. This is my journey. And of course, at this point, you start asking yourself about the characters. What role should you take as the player? What kind of journey should you take? Is this going to be perilous? Is this going to be finding stuff? And of course, in Second Life, it's very easy to put those kinds of games together where you're finding things. And then, of course, what should the character care about? And of course, this is where the conflict sets in because they create the tension and the stakes. This is where you start wondering, wait a second, so what's the problem now in this case? And so you're looking at, there's different ways to establish conflict. You can do it through a challenge, through a puzzle, through battles. Of course, I don't do battle games, although apparently those are possible here in Second Life, but that's not my thing. I keep my battling skills in World of Warcraft. So, that's my own battling fantasy there. But here in Second Life, it's all about finding clues. It's about discovery. It's about figuring out puzzles. And I'm not very good at building puzzles as much as my colleague and partner, Kevin, who is very good at puzzles. And so sometimes we kind of build on each other's skills for this. But this is generally what drives the call to action. What's the important element of conflict here? Why? And why should it matter to you, to the player, to, if you have NPCs, why does it matter? And that's a key element right there. You can't give anything superficial in here. It's like in none of my in none of my games have I ever said, well, you have to save the world. It's like, oh, that's wonderful. That's a huge ideal, but wow, that's big. And it isn't connected enough. Sure, we all want to save the world, but in this conflict, how are we going to save our immediate world? How is this going to move forward? And of course, the way Kevin and I advanced conflict in the story was by creating situations in a place where they would be likely to happen. So, given the example of our biomes, we had, all sorts of differences in climate and all of these things. We had elements in the tundra where everything that happened there was relevant to a tundra environment. We never did something silly, like put something outside of the context of the setting. All of these are connected, okay? And this is important also for the brain to make connections, because if you're learning a lesson, in this, if you're exploring this, then you need to make sure that you make that connection, that it makes sense, because the brain doesn't get fooled that easily. If you're trying to be trivial, it's going to say, oh, come on. And then the player is going to lose interest. And so the conflict needs to be exactly what the setting needs. And of course, we had the desert, where only desert-like elements, and I had so much fun building in the desert, honestly. But because it's but it was based on real things, real historical elements, and then I created a challenge for it. So that's kind of what's important here. And of course, these connections, because again, what I'm doing here is pulling a thread through all of these things. So even conflict makes important connections. And for those of you that may be well versed in emotional intelligence, there's not enough of us that have enough emotional intelligence, which is why we don't get along very well anymore, because there hasn't been enough emphasis placed on building emotional intelligence, which is basically how to get along with each other, how to listen to each other, how to be empathetic, and how to be self-regulating so that you don't explode. Of course, we've seen all these social media people who have absolutely no self-regulation, no empathy. And this all comes from developing emotional intelligence. And stories and games do that. Because if you're involved in the conflict, all of a sudden you're connecting to something other than yourself. And this is a very, very critical element of developing emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, don't fool yourself, it's very, very much connected to the brain. It makes you a better colleague, a better professional, a better person if you have emotional intelligence. It has nothing to do with being a touchy-feely person. And it has a lot to do with being able to understand each other. And that happens very easily in games when you appeal them a certain way. Okay. And of course, the more clues you drop in the game and the more your setting gives kind of ideas, your mind just kind of starts taking them all in. It's part of the setting, it's part of the conflict. Wait a minute, but no, the character has to do this. So it creates a very adaptable learner. And when you face challenges, you develop resilience. And this is also a very, very important element of learning. If you have no resilience, you fall apart at the first provocation, at the first challenge. You find something difficult to do and you say, oh, I can't do this, I give up. But games allow you to do this in an imaginative way so that you develop these skills before you even realize it, because you're having fun, because you're immersed in the story. And sometimes, because Kevin and I were watching a movie last night, and it was just, I wasn't into it, but there was a connection there that was made. I didn't like the story, but they did a very good job with the characters and with the conflict, so that I was engaged, I was invested, even though I didn't particularly care for this story. But that's what matters. If you get invested, either through characters, through setting, or through conflict, you're going to follow them through the end, even though you're not particularly liking where things are going. So this is a really important aspect of conflict. And when you're going to develop conflict, of course, it's always tied to the characters. And like I said before, also tied to the setting. You can't separate them. So, what is an important conflict that the characters must overcome? What's important to the character? Those kinds of things. You have to develop in your mind who this person is, even if the person you're developing is a very one-dimensional, player character. Because that's the way I've kind of made them in the games. But they have to be one-dimensional when you're going to take on the role of the hero, because it's supposed to be adaptable to you. And so you want to give just enough to intrigue people. And so the thread runs from setting to characters to conflict. And the conflict really is the one that provides the most experiences in the game, the most events in the game, because everything that you encounter is a conflict you must overcome. Now, in stories, of course, you have a running conflict that, with scenes, connected, and you can do that here too. But you also have to consider, well, what are the resources you have? What can you do in scripting wise, that sort of thing. Uh, and that's when you reach the climax, or some people like to call it the denouement. And I didn't call it that because I'm very bad at pronouncing it. I'm Mexican, not Italian or French. So, but the climax in the story is a very critical tension point. And in Second Life or in immersive experiences, you have to find the critical point in the story, the last big battle. Because if you play games like me, I'm just, hooked on World of Warcraft, you know that that last final challenge, the the one where you fight the big guy, you know, or when you have to solve the biggest challenge, or you have to go through a dungeon, or whatever it is that it is, that's the climax, because now you're being challenged to do things you'd never done before. But it's all been building up by the conflict. So, and of course in stories, this is, this is where you're stuck to the book, and you can't stop reading because you know it's coming, and that's the most important element of a climax. But climaxes also give, they give intensity to a story. And of course, when you have intensity, you have motivation. I mean, you're not going to come unglued from the story at this point. You're hooked. And here, if you're a reader of mysteries, or that sort of thing, or if there's a challenge that requires a solution, you start wondering about the choices, and you start running through them in your mind. And so this is another part of developing problem solving skills, because you're applying them without being even asked to apply them. You're already working through the potential choices and solutions, and what can happen if you go through any one of these scenarios. Uh, so all of this is about adaptability, reframing understandings, and of course, the most important piece of this cognitively is that it develops flexibility. The brain is a very malleable organ if you use it wisely. So it's kind of important that you build those kinds of things for the game. Uh, and of course, the climax, building a climax in an immersive environment can get a little tricky. Often, you want to test the player's skills, you want to test their knowledge, or even their moral compass. Like, what is the right thing to do? And of course, our moral compasses sometimes point in all sorts of different directions, because of course, life isn't, black and white. There's all sorts of shades of gray in between. Uh, we do what we try to do in the games is more do a test of knowledge than anything else. But then, I'm an educator. I like to test knowledge. I want to see how much you learned. Um, and then, but it has to be something that that you lead the characters towards the end, that it's believable within the context of the story. And then you stick within your setting. Don't do trivial things like all of a sudden send them off into space when you're in the middle of a desert. It doesn't make sense in the context of the story. Do you want to be as close to understanding how these things, and remember what I said, I'm running a thread through all of this. The thread can't be broken. If you break the thread, you break the motivation and the engagement in the story. So it's a delicate balancing act. But you have to think about what events could possibly lead the characters to the end of the story. And this one is a little bit tough to develop in Second Life. Or immersive environments. I do storyboarding. I do a lot of my stories on paper first. So I write them before they even become manifestations in Second Life, because I want to see on paper how they connect. Because if that last event doesn't connect, then it's just contrived. And I could lose my players towards the end. At that point, you're thinking, oh, come on, you're just ending it to end it. So, and I have to admit, there have been moments where then, okay, you know what, this is it. Uh, but um, but interaction is key. And so if you're going to create a story in Second Life, or even in whatever immersive environment of choice you have, you want to make sure that you pull resources that allow you to be interactive. And interaction doesn't have to be that extreme. I built my build this time in VWBPE was actually in the desert, and I basically created a little path, and the path, it was not interactive, but it was guiding. The path was guiding with posters, and so you were clicking on the posters, and it was giving you more information, and then you kept going. So it was a basically no nonsense, quickie way to develop a story and create a story real quickly. And that's what I did, and I followed these same. So what I'm doing here is basically showing you how I developed that build as well as how I developed, the others. Of course, the build was very one-dimensional. It didn't allow for any choices because I didn't have any time to do interactive elements. All I did was guide the player through the experiences. Basically using your own imagination as opposed to actually experiencing it yourself. Um, but finally, when you do get to the resolution, it has to be something that satisfies you. It has to be something that that not only satisfies you, but makes sense to the character, to the main player character or the NPC, whoever matters in the story the most. So there has to be an ending. Just keep in mind that satisfying endings don't necessarily need to be good ones. It's, and what I mean by that is that they don't have to be happy endings for them to be satisfying endings. I mean, we've all seen movies and read books where the ending is just catastrophic, but there's no other way to picture that ending within the context of that story, but that it be end in disaster. And so, and what's really important about the resolution is that it does come to an end. You know, it does come to an end. It might not come to a happy ending, but it does come to an end. And of course, there's also the stories that don't have any resolution at all. You know, big example, Stephen King. But I love Stephen King anyway. You know, I can't have enough of him. But what drives his, what you need to make sure that you have in your story and your game as you keep going, is that if you're not going to have a resolution that's going to satisfy your readers, you better damn well sure you have characters they cared about. And that's one of the things that Stephen King does very well. His exposition is excellent. It's actually exquisite. And his character motivations. It's amazing when he does with one paragraph before he kills off a character and you're thinking, "Oh, I just got to like that person." But you see, that really matters too, because sometimes it's the game and the story support each other, so that even though you may not get the ending you want or the resolution you want, you cared all along the way that these characters, get what they, what they need or what they want, or that they fight for it, because sometimes it truly is about the journey, not the destination. But those are a lot more complex story elements. And here, in immersive elements, you want to have some element of success, and you want to give your player character an element of success in the end. Now, in this game, I know that in others I've added prizes. This time I didn't, mostly because I ran out of time. But a lot of times the resolution is part of the prize. It's like, oh yay, I got a prize! I'm so excited. But for me, everything needs to be connected. And one of the things that makes it even more difficult is trying to give out a prize in a game that is related to the game. And it's not easy, especially when you consider, okay, Second Life, what do people want? Well, they want this, or this. Yeah, none of that is related to the game. So I struggle with that piece a great deal. But I know that one of the most important elements here is to keep running that thread all the way to the end, even if the resolution is an explosion where everybody dies. And of course, that's not going to happen here in Second Life and immersive experiences. It has to make sense that it happened, based on the character's actions, based on the conflict that was going on, and most certainly based on the setting that you put them in, because all of those are connected to each other. And I feel like the setting and the characters are the most critical elements when you're going to build or create a story here in Second Life with game elements. That's what you want. You want to make sure that your setting is stellar. And of course, here in Second Life, that's what we love to see, right? That's why we love our immersive experiences. We want to see what somebody has built, what's the amazing elements in here. But then you start adding a character in there, and now you've got a story. And now you've got something that connects to you. You're not just going around like in a museum seeing all the pretty things, all the exciting things. Now you're a person involved in it. And that involvement is the key to these playable journeys, to the ability to build a game. And you engage the mind as well. Games are very powerful for engaging the mind. It's for developing emotional intelligence and for developing cognitive acuity because of its multimodalness. People don't learn just in text, and they certainly don't learn just in pictures. But you put them together, and now you've got double the possibilities in this. We haven't toyed with sound yet, because sound's a little trickier, but definitely those two are critical elements here in an immersive environment, where you have, and when you have a team, it works out even better, and so the last thing I want to talk to you, and I told Becky that, I wasn't going to do a whole 45 minutes, but tools for development. I'm not going to give you my scripts because they're not mine, they're Kevin's actually. I started developing the scripts. They're proprietary. And so I do have scripts that are mine and scripts that are Kevin's. So one of the I had kind of joked around with Becky earlier that one of the best tools you can have or the best resource you can have is a friend or close loved one who knows how to script, who knows and who knows how to build. And so, I'd like to think I'm a double whammy in that because I can do both. But I learned from my partner. So, Kevin has spent long hours teaching me how to make a script do something. But the most critical ones that I would recommend that, if for stories, you need sensors, you need communication tools. And when I say communication tools, it's always more appealing to have a HUD, because if you don't have a HUD, you're just relying on messages on pop-ups or things like that. Big, advice piece here: messages, to make sure that they have appealed, that they can be seen by everyone, because of course messages, you can't be without messages if you're going to advance the game. The game is based on text ultimately. So when you try to make it as accessible as possible by the HUD having the image of the text as well as the text chat. Just don't, when you script it, don't script it as a text chat, as a local chat. Script it as an instant message. Otherwise, you're going to drive everyone around you crazy. You want the game to be personal for each individual. So if you're going to do scripts that talk to people, do the instant message instead. And I would recommend anything that you have that's interactive in Second Life. If you have some, like a sign that gives out a message and a note card, for instance, put it in instant message instead of local chat. And that way, if you have a group of people and 3 or 4 of them are clicking on them at once, the message keeps popping up for everyone. So you want to keep it as intimate as possible. And of course, you also want to give the opportunity for people to advance the game at their own pace. And it's surprising what a little thing like messages can do to advancing the game and to making sure that it becomes an intimate experience between the player character and the game. Otherwise, it becomes, and I know we've toyed with the idea of making it collaborative. It's very difficult in Second Life because everything is proprietary in Second Life. One person owns an object, one person owns this, so it's difficult to script, or at least my skills in scripting aren't there yet. But I do recommend also a new tool that will make, if you're not a storyteller, I'm a storyteller, I love stories. I know sometimes the characters talk to me and I'm thinking that's where the story's going. And so, but I'm very kind of, I'm very creative that way. I love stories and stories talk to me. And so sometimes when we built the biomes, for example, I walked around and I stood in each of the biomes and I let the story come to me. And then that's when it started developing. And that's when I realized, oh, this is what I need here. And then I would go out there and do the legwork and find the information. But what helped me a lot this last year only, because everything else I've developed myself, was AI. AI can help you create a story if you're not good at it. If you don't know how to develop a conflict or what kind of setting you can have, feed AI a question. And I would recommend that you use some of the questions I created here, and you will get the full interactive, because I know the one you're seeing right now is just an image, but I gave Becky the link to the one that's interactive. So what you'll find is that those little red buttons on the image are clickable, and it'll give you information, which is essentially the information I gave you. Yeah. Give or take a few extra explanations here and there. So those are basically the main tools that are used for storytelling. But in the end, you really want to have an affinity towards it. But if you don't, use this as a guide. Make sure you have at least those 5 things. There's a bunch of other things you can create, but these are the main 5 that work really well in immersive environments if you're clever enough to develop it. And just remember, here, even though the visual can make it stunning, can make the setting come to life, it's really the words that you speak to your player characters that matter the most. So the story is going to be the one that's going to advance it for people. The interactions, of course, are fun and exciting, but really it's the story that's going to drive them forward. If the story isn't engaging enough, they're not going to advance forward. Especially not play a game that doesn't have a prize in the end. My goodness. But But anyway, generally that's my playable journeys. There's a lot of research on games, gamification, game-based learning. I've taken two dissertator students through a dissertation and a doctorate by doing studies on games. One of them did gamification in a course, and the other one did game-based learning in a math class. So I've had a little bit of experience, and that's why I'm so completely sold on how important games are to the learning process. You just have to do it the right way. Some games are easy and fun and quick, but they don't offer any learning. But when you layer a story into it, now the learning matters, and that's kind of the bottom line with these playable journeys that I'm talking about. And I think I'm going to stop chatting now because I've been talking nonstop. That's not usually my thing. But anyway, Becky, I ended a little early, but if there are any questions, please, by all means, I'll entertain them now.
Yes, we didn't have any. I think people were just mesmerized, Letty. We didn't have anything in chat, but guys, feel free to put any questions in chat that you have or comments, or you're welcome to use voice as well if you have questions. This is so fascinating. And while they're thinking about that, actually your games are so much fun at VWBPE and challenging, and I love the idea of hiding things in certain places that help build the story. That's fabulous, and I actually have tons of notes. I liked almost everything you said.
No, well, thank you.
But and you did touch on this just a little bit. I love that you said you were standing in the setting and the ideas kind of came to you. But how do you get an idea for a story, or how do you get started? Each of these steps help us. But do you start a certain place, or probably many places? Can you give us some ideas about how to get started?
Well, creativity can be tricky and it can be also, elusive, but I always start with a setting. There's the ones that are kind of trickier is because right now Kevin and I are building in the Relay for Life event. And we always create a mini game in the building as well. I mean, we don't have region sizes as we do here. Um, but it always starts with the story. So first we brainstorm. Okay, well, what is the setting? What do we want this place to look like? And we look up pictures, images. Google's. It's surprising how much images convey to me. That's my process. I need to see things and to see images of places, and then find out which one speaks to me. So usually that's where I start. And that's why here I started with the setting, even though some people would start with the characters. But I think that's kind of a symbiotic relationship. I think that people who are a lot more deeper into storytelling, like if they're familiar with writing stories and stuff like that, will more than likely start with characters. But I find that settings can be the motivational element. That's where I start. But it comes with a lot of brainstorming, a lot of images until things start, narrowing down.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Val is asking, I like that you said everyone needs a go-to person for tech skills since we can't all be experts in everything. Do you think that AI is getting better at scripting? And Maria's asking, have you used AI to create LL scripts?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I'm getting Kevin's bad habit of saying yes and no. No. Okay. So that's two kind of questions. So let me kind of
It
first,
is, yeah.
yes, AI can help you script. However, it cannot help you script if you don't know a darn thing about scripting.
Okay.
So, I've asked it questions. Kevin can ask it a lot more complex questions and it will generate a script for you. I know I was trying to fix a script that we had broken in the game. I don't remember which one it was. And I went through this darn thing line by line. And if you've seen scripts, you know how they cross your eyes. So I finally said, I grabbed a snippet, I pulled it in ChatGPT, and I asked it, which element here is not working? And then it generated, well, this is probably the problem. And then I was good, okay, rewrite it for me. And then it would rewrite it for me. And then I would say, But again, I needed scripting knowledge, because then I would tell it, no, this will not work because it's not. Because one time it gave me a script with linked prims and it wasn't a linked prim. So remember, AI is not always right. So then I redirected it and I told it, no, there are no linked prims. It will not work that way. So give me one that does not have. And so then it rewrote it. And then when I saw it, I thought, okay, that's going to work. And then I realized, but this is what I've been doing a lot. I've been doing a lot of AI presentations too. The human has to be in control. So if you don't know anything about scripting, is not, you can ask it, can you please generate a Second Life, script that uses, that can allow this to happen. And it will generate one for you. The problem is that if it creates bugs, or if it's really complex, you're not even going to know how to apply it. Because one time I asked it a question like that and it generated a 3-mile long script, and I'm thinking, whoa, what? So then I went back and said, okay, you know what? I need to be a little more specific. So I have used it for that. Kevin uses it more because his knowledge of scripting is a lot more, sophisticated than mine. So that's the first part. So it can create scripts, but you have to come in with your own knowledge. And that's what I tell my students when they use AI for certain assignments. If you don't know your content already, you're not going to generate good results from AI, because you need to monitor it. You're the human in charge. And so that's where you kind of get into that. And then let's see, did I answer both questions? AI is getting
Yes.
better at scripting, but it's only as good as the human driving. So, and that's going to be my end point right there on AI. It always has to be about the human and how much you know. But I can
Great.
add this though. Sometimes it teaches me. It did teach me how to
Mhm.
do something I didn't know how to do. And then I did the same thing with my LMS. I was trying to design a page, and I know HTML. Okay. And so when I went in there and I asked it, create a 2-column page layout that does this, and this, it generated it. But then when I pulled it into our LMS, it didn't work. So then I went back and I said, well, this is the context. It's not working. It's doing this. And said, oh, okay, yeah, this application blocks this script. And so then I asked it, okay, so what's the workaround? And then it said, okay, so if you don't want to encounter that blockage, you can do it this way. And then it generated the HTML code for me. And oh my God, it's like the heavens opened up to me and there was angels, singing from above. And then I put it in the LMS. That was really, it was just destroying everything visual in there. And it worked so beautifully. Oh my God. Then I started sharing it with everyone, my colleagues. Oh, you want to make it look good? Here, use this script. So yes, but it does take a conversation. If you're one of those people that just ask one AI prompt, it's not going to be enough. You need to dig and dig and dig and dig until you get at what you want. I hope I answered your
That's
questions. I think I feel like I scattered around.
No, I think you did a great job. And there are places here in Second Life to learn scripting. Bill's Brewery, Happy Hippo. We actually have Max does a really nice job, or had a little set of scripting lessons, and she's going to put those resources in our Ed Resources building as well. And I imagine she's open to teaching scripting again if people were clamoring for it. So it's good to have a basic knowledge for sure. And thank you for all that, because I think that's extremely helpful. Even with
Mhm.
ChatGPT, you have to keep asking it sometimes to get it to do what you want it to do.
Exactly.
Um,
And those places that you mentioned, Becky, are excellent. When I first started in Second Life, I didn't know Kevin. I didn't meet him until like 5, 6 years later. I attended all of those, Builders Brewery sessions, Happy Hippo, I even bought scripting tutorials, when I wanted to learn how to do something. I bought a book, but I don't remember who the person is, but she was excellent at breaking down the steps. And the whole lesson was on creating a washing machine. I didn't want to create a washing machine, but the skills to make it blink and move, those were critical to learn to do other things. And that's where my knowledge of HUD creation kind of got started, by building a washing machine. Serious,
oh,
curiously.
That's cool. That's great to know. So you're learning how to do something, but you're really learning the concepts of something you
Yes,
may want to do later down the line. I love
exactly.
that.
Yes.
So Little Stream asks, can we have a link to one of your games? I mean, can we see one? I loved what you said. Are you for hire? Say if you want a game on your sim.
I would love to say yes if it brings me money, but I don't have time. Unfortunately, I do these for fun. We will be in Relay for Life. We don't know yet quite. We've been brainstorming, but we don't know what the game element is. So far, the only games that I've built, the full-blown games, are actually in the VWBPE lands, but two of them are gone because the lands changed. There is the Rock and Bone Mysteries is still there, but you'd have to wait until the regions are back. I actually have no idea if they're gone. I think Kevin said they should be gone by now. But
Yeah, I
if you
think they're gone. Yeah.
yeah, so if you stop by next year, the three games are still gonna be there. I'm not gonna advance them. It was a trilogy. I'm done with that game. I don't know what the next game will be, but that's for that one's done. So but yeah, but I do little ones, like the Relay for Life. Those are fun to do, and of course it always has to it's educational threads and things like that. So but yeah, but in Second Life everything's so transient, unless you buy a region, you put all your stuff there, they're not going to stay there forever. So yeah.
The next VWBPE is in March of next year, and we'll do advertisement for it around here. So keep your eyes open for the next VWBPE for sure. Oh, the
Yeah,
Relay for Life.
it's in
When
two
is it?
weeks Yeah, it's I think it's the either the first or second week, because I know we just got access to the regions as builders. So we're in development, but it won't open up until I want to say June 7. I don't remember fully the dates on them. I'd have to
Mhm.
check. But yeah, it's the beginning of June for sure. And you can just search it also online. Second Life Relay for Life, and you'll get all sorts of information from it.
Yeah,
But Will,
June
the only thing I can
16th.
tell you right now is that we're going to be in which region again? In recovery. That's because they name their regions, and that's all I know. I don't know specifically yet because they're not open to the public. June 16th. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, SB. Um, so, do you have? I'm waiting for other people to have questions, but while we're waiting, do you think that there's a certain number of clues that you feel is needed, or is there a certain number that are too many? How do you know if a clue is is not too hard or hard enough? And talked a lot about Kevin, my good friend as well, and you think that people need a collaborator who helps kind of watch that for you because maybe you're too close to it. So talk about
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, we love each other, but we've also had some fights because I'm the story writer. And if his script doesn't follow my story, then we start thinking, it's like, wait a second, no, that's not what I meant. No, no, let me see the script. But generally, what you were saying about clues, it's for those of you that love fantasy. There's a magic in three. And for a game that's not going to be that long, three clues, three general areas are going to be perfect before you get to the end, which is the fourth or fifth one. So of course the VWBP regions are huge. There are several regions, and so we spread those out. And that's why it's a trilogy. The game is a trilogy because we're doing four events in every one of them, and so it's spread out across all the regions over time. But generally, I believe in that. There is such a thing as too much. People get tired, and if you have adult professionals coming into Second Life, of course there's all walks, but if you're going to come in and play a game, you want to be able to play it quickly. And so the games can be played. So if you really sit down and start following every clue and things, you can finish it in like a couple of hours. If you don't have that kind of time per day, then you can do it in 2 or 3 days. For some people, that's not enough. They want more. But the longer games draw exhaustion, and plus they also have it's it's more difficult to find the time because these types of games do take time to do. But that's, that's the rule of thumb that I always do. It's just an unofficial one, the rule of three plus a resolution. Sometimes I do four. I think this time I did four, but purely by accident. Because I developed four events in the different regions, and then I came back and did, wait a second, no, that was supposed to be the starter event, but it's not. That, oh shoot, now I have four. But I mean, because sometimes you also have to give your creativity some kind of wings to fly. And if it tells you there's four instead of three, then you go with four.
Okay, that makes sense. And so did each of the three pieces, they had a resolution, but then the next one built on that? Um,
Yeah, what we tried to do is we created the storylines with historical elements. So all the places that drop clues were actually real places, you know, in a tundra in the world, in a desert in the world. The Middle East and the Sahara appealed to me a great deal because there were some really fascinating stories around those. Um, but um, but yeah, each of them in this case were kind of, you would solve it and then you'd have to go to the next place, because in this case, because they were rock and bone mysteries, we had an archaeologist was the player character, a forensics archaeologist, different ones like that were digging in the earth, that were finding stuff and clues that were historical. The last one tends to be the hardest one and the one that concludes it, although sometimes I don't follow those rules, because basically I just, what I do is I want to make sure that I've used enough places and engaged enough people to want to have appeal in there. I know that the first one, the five kingdoms, the queens in their five kingdoms, did have a very precise resolution. And then the one from the previous one also had very precise resolutions. I don't think this one does specifically. I think it's just a series of adventures more than anything else, but those are fun too. So anyway,
I think
but
of
yeah, but
fan
not all games in Second Life have resolutions necessarily, just complex events that happen in here.
right, right. And SB's correcting, it's June 7th.
Oh, there it is. Oh,
7th.
shoot, we have less time to build than I thought.
Yikes. So Buffy's asking, do you give out prizes or awards for the finishers?
In the Rock and Bone, no, because we couldn't find something relevant to give out, and in the end, because of the way the game was scripted, we couldn't add that piece of code that would give out a prize this time around. The previous ones have given out prizes, but not this one. This one I'd like to say is though the reward is for the pleasure of having played it.
Big
But no,
congratulations
Buffy,
and
sorry,
hooray.
this one doesn't have prizes. We couldn't script it in the end.
I think you said you ran out of time. Yeah.
Yes, we ran out of time because remember, you also, if you're going to give out a prize, remember rules of Second Life. Uh, it has to be something you own and you have the rights to. So when I give out prize, I have to build them. I can't buy something in the marketplace and give it away because it violates user terms. So that's where the complication in prizes is here, because I can't buy something and then duplicate it. I have to make it,
Right.
and that takes time.
Yeah, that's a little bit frustrating, isn't it? I've even written to
Yes.
creators and asking them permission and they don't get back with you. So,
Oh
or
no,
at least
that's
I
their way
haven't.
of saying no, we don't give you permission.
Exactly, exactly. You can plead your case, but they don't really.
Yes, yes. Um, yeah, the some full perms are sold as builders kits, and so I can use builders kits for that. But I can't. But it has to make sure that it becomes something totally different, because even in full perms, there's always still user rights. They basically say no, you can't just give it out like this, even if it's full perm. The full perm is intended to help you modify it, to help you make it your own, not to give it out exactly the way the creator made it. And for being a creative person myself and an academic, I'm very big on rights. If you created it, you have the rights over it, and nobody can use it exactly the way you created it. It has to either have the right permissions or be modifiable in such a way that it becomes something else. It's what do you call it? Remixing. But even then, you gotta be careful how you do that, because a creator, I mean, that's your lifeblood right there. You made it.
Right. It's your own intellectual property, and we're
It
very
is
big.
exactly. Yes, exactly right.
So I have two. I'm going to put these together because I'd love to know the answer to both of them. Um, and then we will wind down here. Thank you so
hmm
much. Um, I love that you talked about testing your students or the players of your game. Um,
hmm
Give us an example, and I know that you said like some of it might even be just moral compass.
Yes.
Sorry.
hmm
Then my other question is, do you recommend students build games?
Okay. Well, the example of testing is because I use a lot of genuine places and events. Like one of the places in the desert I built was the Eye of the Sahara. I don't know if any of you all have heard of it, but you have to stand really far away to see it, because and the actual Eye of the Sahara, which is a real place, can't be seen if you're standing in it because it's just so huge. You can only see it from space. So in a question related to that, because in the eye, of course, I also fantasize them. I put the Eye of the Sahara is a dangerous place, but it also has important minerals for the lifeblood of such and such and such. And then the question to advance has something to do with the minerals or whatever it is that makes the Eye of the Sahara unique, and why some people find it so fantastical, because it's really a swirl in the earth, and when you see it, it looks like an eye, and it's got blue elements that you don't expect to see in a desert. So that's one way I test knowledge. And so a lot of times, in order to be able to answer the questions in the game, you have to look stuff up, because I don't give you everything. you know and then the second part is students building, you said.
Building a game, yes.
Building a game. I think that it's important that you show them how to build it on paper. First, Second Life is very complex. I've had, the first study I did, I had students building, but technically what we had was a huge warehouse of furniture and items that we created ourselves, myself and my instructional developer, so that the students could then buy them for free and populate their areas, and they could color them and things like that to make it their own. But building is very, very complex. That's years and years. And when you add building to the complicated element, that makes it difficult. But if you do it on paper, it's a lot. Then they get a little more engaged, because they're not dealing with skills that are too difficult for them to master in a little piece of time. Because you and I work in universities. Our semesters are 3-4 months long. you know
Yeah.
they don't
The
learn
end
how to
comes
build
too
in that.
quickly.
Yes, they would need like a course that lasts 2 years to really get into it.
But that's
But yeah, but
great.
on paper, certainly it's a good skill to develop.
A great approach. Give them stuff that they can use, and then have
hmm
them. I love it. Well,
Well, it certainly
thanks
resolved a lot of conflicts if we did it that way.
for sure. And that's why we had you here, because you have all this experience, and I think it's very inspiring. We'd like to thank everybody who's attended today. And just a reminder, you'll be able to find today's recording on our VWEC YouTube channel. And I'll give you the link right here. If you would like to take a copy of today's slides, Letty has shared as she said, the interactive web version in her sign on the board on the side of the deck. So if you look over there where there's lots of signs, hers is the large one. Look for her slide for this presentation. I think I have the link if I can grab it.
Yeah, and it uses an application called Genially, which does a lot of pop-ups and interactives. So when I do presentations in conferences, I usually use Genially. I don't use slides anymore.
But it is on that sign over there. So grab it over there, and I'll try to get the whole thing in just a second. Letty's presentation was the kickoff to our VWEC Summer of Fun that is starting today. Celebrating that learning is fun and can happen in fun ways. In the spirit of this, our great friend and colleague, Namara McNamara of Utopia will be hosting a Summer of Fun barbecue on Saturday, June 7th at 11 a.m. here on the deck. The next day, we will be hosting the NPC Common Grounds here at the deck at 11 a.m. And that's a nice little dance and a chance to network with folks. Also, our amazing Buffy Bill, sitting right here in front of me, has set up a Summer of Fun obstacle course here on the VWEC Edgeverse. You'll want to check it out. So let me put that in here for your viewing pleasure, and we'll have a sign out with that link in it very, very soon as well. And soon our Commons building will be filled with games. If you have a fun idea, please let our events team know, or it's fine to just send it to me and I'll get it to them. Also, our next expert series, as you can see on the slide on my left, will be Experiential Learning Processes panel, which will include Lucina, Marla, Max Chatnoir, Haley West, and Madeline McMinner, all who use experiential learning in their own lives with their own students and participants. To see all the VWEC events, please check out the VWEC Plaza Events calendar. Again, one more link. And also we have a calendar set up over in the Info Center. And join us on social media, and I'll just give you all of those links in many, many ways. And we just appreciate you so much, Letty. This has just been fabulous. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm so inspired, and I'm gonna do a game.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always fun talking about games, and I love stories. It's been a passion of mine all my life. Thank you.
And I think everybody is a storyteller, or even people who say they aren't. All they have to do is share their experience, and all of a sudden it's a story. So I think everybody can do that for sure. Thank you again. Great to see everyone. Have a lovely long weekend if you're in the US, and a weekend for those of you that aren't.